So I suppose if we just take the top blue lines first of all, as I mentioned, so you got the buyer on one side, the seller on the other side. The commercial agreement is being made between those two parties. The payment orders or the invoices are being exchanged. Again, these are potentially, as we keep mentioning, the potentially paper documents that need to be reviewed. These documents have to be passed back from the other. Once that agreement's been placed, the buyer will then approach the bank themselves and present that information, and the seller will do the same. Depending on whether, say, it's an LC, so the bank will issue the LC, will go back to the buyer, which will then get sent to the buyer's bank and the seller. Then, so that's all the sort of the contracts around that. Then in between, you've got the seller with a service provider on the right-hand side, getting all the required documentation, the insurance documentation, the certificate of origin to prove that the goods are what they say. Obviously, they have to be insured. They then need to be shipped to the other country, and that can be done via different carriers, and whether it's vessels or whether it's planes, and there could be multiple goods shipments. So they will go through, and then when they land on the other side of the world, the same thing happens. You've got going through customs into another carrier to go to the buyer. Then once all that's wrapped up, then you've got on a bit the payments being made to the final payments being made to the seller via Swift payment, and all the documentation wrapped up. But I think getting back to what Mark said, even if you're looking at each one of these icons as such, there can be multiple shipments normally, multiple agents, multiple insurance companies. So it is just a very complex structure and network.
Yeah, and you know, Una, as far as the shipments themselves, you know, there's critical moments and there's critical documents in the trade finance schematic here, right? So first is, you know, the port of loading, you know, and the bill of lading documents. So if you're not familiar with the bill of lading documents, but that one of the documents that needs to be proved when you're making payments is that the goods have been shipped. And so we find that a lot of financial institutions have a real challenge when it comes to verifying the bill of lading to determine whether or not, as Colin mentioned, these are the correct goods, because that's where you can and have a lot of risk for being exposed to money laundering, specifically in trade finance, because if things are under or overvalued. And then, you know, one of the risk indicators that Windward can look at, and that we assist financial institutions, are, you know, vessel tracking and container tracking to make sure that the bill of lading matches what is actually happening on the ground in real time, and then also historically too. You know, if a financial institution finds themselves under a look back, you know, they have to be able to justify and say, yes, I can say that this shipment occurred. And from a maritime perspective, that's been a real challenge, and especially like you had mentioned before, Una, digitizing these bill of lading documents for automation. So that's kind of where the industry is heading. But there's a lot of technology in place already to assist financial institutions with that.